Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Life is People. Well, tonight it's a great honour to catch up with someone that, we had some experiences on tour, didn't we, son?
Yeah, definitely. It's great to see you.
So, without any further ado, I mean, how's it going this afternoon, Chesky?
Uh, I've been working on some new music in Los Angeles. I went on after I saw you in England. Um, I did some festival dates in Florida, and then did a whole tour of the West Coast, and then ended up in Los Angeles for about a month before coming back east to because my family needed me. So,
So, the first questions I really want to sort of ask you, really, from this sort of perspective of people listening, is where did this whole journey with music start for you, my friend?
ooh, I think it started. I th- well, I mean, my entire journey with music started when I was 6 years old, and I think I had a natural inclination towards music. I was just naturally attracted to it. But when I was 6 years old, I was in a school that was providing free music lessons for children. So I took the violin. I picked up a violin for the first time when I was 6 or 7, and yeah, 6, I think. And because my mother wouldn't let me play the guitar, which I really wanted to play. I really wanted to, be cool and play a guitar. And she said it was too big for me, so I picked up the violin and took lessons. And I don't think I was technically. I was never like a very good like sight reader or anything like that. I wasn't the most technical player, but I played with a lot of heart even when I was like a little kid. And I started writing songs really young, like 8 years old. I started trying to do my own raps on a Fisher Price tape recorder. I heard the Fat Boys and the Beach Boys um, when I was 5, and that's like my first taste of hip hop. And so I guess it all went from there. I never really stopped. Mira, vete al cuarto, por favor. I'm sorry, my nephew's like making hella noise.
So, was there any sort of like particular influences that sort of stemmed you off? When you said you were writing rap, was there any particular writers or any particular musicians that sort of kind of was a great influence? Or
Like initially, we're talking about the 80s. I'm 40 years old now, so we're talking about the 80s. Initially, it was like stuff little kids would like. I loved Fresh Prince. I loved MC Hammer. I loved Heavy D. I loved the Fat Boys, Run DMC, things like that. Um, that's like initially the stuff I liked in hip hop, and then my parents had really interesting music tastes, and so that was a big influence on me as well. So my parents were big salseros. Like my father's from Puerto Rico, and my mother lived in Puerto Rico, and she's like a super connoisseur of salsa music as well. So I grew up with like this really intense upbringing in salsa and nueva trova folk music, which is like Caribbean folk music, super political kind of stuff. And then on top of that, stuff like the Talking Heads and Tracy Chapman, and eventually my father showed me Public Enemy. I mean, all that stuff was a big influence on me. Uh, Eventually, NWA, Ice T. Yeah, that's like my early influences.
so when you're writing, this is one of the fascinating things that, as you know, I told you before, I lived in Argentina for a bit, and they said the minute you know you conquer a language is when you dream in the language. So when you're writing a song down, will you initially write in what, Spanish, Italian, or English?
Uh, just depends on the day, honestly.
Right.
If I when I was in Puerto Rico like a year ago, I just started writing everything in Spanish. I think that influences you being around whoever you're around, and but sometimes I'll break into just like writing Spanish things suddenly for no reason. But mostly I write in English. You know, I feel like I've mastered English far better than any other language at this point. I've read the most in English, even though I've read. My Italian's terrible. My nephew's far better at Italian than me. Like, for real, he's super fluent in Italian, and I'm not. My mother is. So my mother and my brother are fluent. So I'm more capable in Spanish and English.
It's fascinating. I don't know if you sort of feel the same way, but you find that in my limited Spanish, I find that it's more of you get more of an insight into language, because English is quite sort of regular, you know, it flows a lot, but there's a lot you can sort of almost romantical, that's the right word, in Spanish. You can it's a great add, and it really kind of adds to vocabulary of what you're doing. I mean, you know, I don't know if you agree.
It's very poetic naturally. I feel like when I try to translate some Spanish lyrics or something, it's a bit difficult. It's a more poetic language naturally. I think all the Romance languages are, you know. So I think English could be super detailed in certain ways. That's cool though. And I do have I would say I have a stronger vocabulary in English, but yeah, there's something naturally poetic. That's all I could say. That gets lost in translation.
Yeah, exactly. It has that, how can you sort of say, the translation, and equally it's kind of almost the rhythm of how things are spoken. I mean, English can be very in your face at times, but there's a rhythm and a pattern to Spanish, like you say, to cross over must be really difficult, because especially with someone like you who is more kind of in depth into the language, so it must be quite difficult to sort of cross them over, so it must be quite confusing for you.
Sometimes, yeah. And I think there's just like a great history of, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me now that there's like such a strong history of literature in Latin America and poetry, and that's what my parents studied, and that's how they met, and that's what they taught in the past as well. And, literature, Latin American literature and film. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me, and the style of writing that's come out of Latin America, magical realism, it makes a ton of sense that it's like a style that's very free flowing. When you're speaking the language as well, it's very it could feel like song. It could be, especially Caribbean, the way we speak in the Caribbean, it could be very sing-songy. ¿Qué pasa? This guy's trying to take over. Hey, mira, estoy en entrevista. No, tú, ay, pero verlo. Yo no te puedo ayudar a lo mismo. Está corta, sí, pero pulíchate, okay?
That's what you call proper rock and roll, my friend.
Yeah, man. I don't even have kids, and this is what it's come to.
So you sort of say you sort of like give a bit of a brief, you know, you're playing violin, you're sort of learning hip hop. Can you remember your very first gig, sort of like getting up in front of a stage?
Oh, like, yeah, probably, aside from violin recitals, which don't count, and they were frightening. I was actually in a boys choir when I lived in Atlanta, Georgia. My mother was like, you know, it's like super cultured and stuff. She'd always like try to get us involved in arts, and she made me try out for this famous boys choir that would go and like sing for the Pope and stuff like that. And so I was like 7 years old, 7 years old, 6 years old probably, and I had to try out for some choir that would like sing these big fancy shows, and that was my first major gigs in front of like hundreds of people was singing in a choir. But as alternative rocker or whatever you want to say, or hip hop or whatever the hell I do, that would have been when I was probably like 15 or 16 years old. My cousin's 10 years older than me, and he's like a known, mostly metal guy, drummer, mostly metal drummer. He started in punk when he was really, really young, but he's mostly a metal drummer, and he's quite known in New Haven, in this whole area, in all of Connecticut, I would say. And he set us up with our first gigs. I was probably 16 years old, and it was at some all ages, I don't know, art center, I think, in the suburbs of Connecticut somewhere. Probably Madison Arts Barn it was called. So yeah, that was it was a bit intimidating, but we had a lot of friends come with us, and we had been jamming for years already. At that point, it's like probably 3 or 4 years before we ever played a show, and doing our little recordings and stuff like that. I've been recording myself like on 4-tracks since I was 14. So
That's quite a baptism of fire. So I mean, from, if I'm getting this correctly, you're jumping into what the first sort of gig you're doing with is a metal crowd. I mean, that's quite a sort of jump into the fire, isn't it? That's
yeah, if you call it like an alternative metal, hardcore. I don't know what hardcore out here was. That was a scary. It was a scene I love. Like, I'm talking about like hardcore punk, like, and metal, which was intersected when I moved to Connecticut when I was in my early teens. There was an intersection of metal and punk, and really it was like New York style hardcore music, which was crossover music of both metal and punk. And yeah, that was a freaky audience to play for. But there was also this really kind of alternative ska and even indie rock and skate punk kind of audience that was really open-minded. And so they were pretty kind to us, even though we had no idea what we were doing. And I remember we made our first cassette tape in '97, and so I would have been 16. My brother would have been 14, and Mike King, one of my best friends, he was also in the group. And yeah, we were like 16 at the time when our cassette tape came out, and we started selling the tape before we really gigged. That kind of shows you the time period. People were just so interested in underground music, and it wasn't like it was, even though we were early internet users, this was really pre-internet still.
yeah, they were the days, my friend. You know what I mean? They were the I call them the kind of. It makes you realise how old we are. Even though we don't feel that old. They were the days before, like you say, it's kind of like a black and white days before the internet started, and it's like things were done literally hand to hand and word of mouth more.
Yeah, and people were really like willing to take chances on even young kids. We sold a decent amount of those tapes, and it was I remember it being a big process to figure out how to do it and how to get the artwork done. And it was a real learning experience. So that tape, as terrible as I think it is, and as embarrassed as I am of it, I think it's pretty cool that we did it, because we were using drum machines for the first time and doing all this improvised music, like a lot of improvised hip-hop, live hip-hop stuff with a band. Even back then, the whole song would just be freestyle. And then some of the more embarrassing moments were like ska and reggae influenced, or like really, really bad hardcore influence, like just like, yeah. But we were all over the place even back then. We just had tons of influences, and that's kind of the generation. I think we were the first generation, I would say, of hodgepodge genres. Like, I came out of a punk scene or whatever that was like also super hip hop. Like, everyone did graffiti, everyone dressed super, like, with visors and like shaved things into their hair and their eyebrows, or they were like legitimate gangsters, like that was kind of like the scene I came out of as a kid. And so, and my cousin was sort of linked to that too. So yeah, so that's kind of my upbringing, like the early days.
Yeah, and I think I don't know your insights on that. Just lingering on that a bit, one of the things I always find about, particularly, I don't know, I always think music carries on and it's always innovative and it's always moving on, and you know, things do it move on. But I sort of felt maybe early 90s, definitely by the end of the 90s, the whole scene had died. I remember one of my favorite rappers at the time was Paris, and I remember him.
Oh yeah.
I remember him spitting lyrics about like, why are they just singing about shiny car rims and all this early in the 90s, and you kind of felt he was ahead of his time. By the end of the 90s, that's all it was. It was like hip hop, and a lot of music went from being this underground, real thing to being mainstream everywhere.
We watched it go pop. We watched hip hop. We watched it happen, literally from the year 96 to 90. From the years like 95 to 98, like years when I was in high school, I watched the transformation of hip hop turn to pop music. And we even wrote, we had our own zines or magazines and stuff. We had one that we created called Connections, and we would write about this stuff. And one example was Busta Rhymes. He was a rapper we really looked up to. He put out this ferocious record when I was in 95, I believe. Maybe it was 94. No, it was 95, I think. I got to see him when he first put out his solo record. And it was like a punk show. It was like mosh pits and super aggressive. By 98, he was doing like a sound we would consider jiggy, and everything was shifting, and Puff Daddy had taken over, and Puff Daddy and Mace and all this real popified version of hip hop had taken over. And on the mainstream, I think it was one of the worst eras of popular music in history. So we're talking about versions of music that we loved. Something kind of like hardcore became new metal, like Limp Bizkit. I absolutely was offended by Limp Bizkit when they came out. I was like, these lyrics are trash, this music's overproduced, you know. And I was a fan of like what you would maybe consider the first generation, like the first Korn album and the first Deftones. Or Deftones always kind of transcended for me, but like they were always good to me. But a lot of what came from Rage Against the Machine became really, really bad to me, like overproduced, terrible lyrics, terrible messages. And it happened to hip hop too. Like became Puff Daddy, it became Cash Money, it became these really whack versions of things we loved. And what that did was strengthen the underground. So on the underground, we had our little scenes, and we saw underground hip hop and hardcore and punk kind of explode as a reaction to what was happening on a mainstream scale. And I think it was really important to me. I think that's probably the reason I make the music I make. Honestly, that whole time period, a reaction to what I consider some of the worst. And that's also the era when boy bands came out, and girl bands, and the Swedish takeover of American pop, which is, you know, a lot of it's like by Swedish songwriters that were started with Ace of Base, and then they came over and started writing about a quarter of all the hits in America. There's a really good book called The Song Machine about that, if you ever feel like reading that. But yeah, we had a complete visceral reaction to that, and that's why we started making the music we made, which was weird as hell, and just off the wall, and nothing that would ever be considered pop at all.
Yeah.
I have to help my nephew for 1 second.
No, go ahead,
you don't mind.
go ahead.
Maybe,
go ahead. It's all right.
Sorry about that. Got my hands full, man.
That's the next generation, brother. That's all it's all about. You've got to remember the thing, sort of sum that up what you just saying about that time then. I always have it back in my head was just a single line from Bill Hicks when he said, you know, that basically the music industry was basically started gearing itself towards 12-year-old girls. And he said, when did it all happen? What happened? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When did Bill Hicks pass away?
90. Oh, we're talking 96. Yeah, around about that time.
Oh
right?
Man, he saw the beginning of the transformation. He didn't even see how bad it got.
No, exactly. I mean, I think that, I mean, I've mentioned it a few times that I was lucky enough to meet Bill twice because you know what I mean.
Oh,
Actually,
what? That's incredible.
dude, he was. And do you know what is always fascinating, man? And it's one of those things I think about a lot of people. They're musicians and stuff, and think, what would they be like if they were around here? Because what fascinated me about this, it goes into what you were just saying about the time then, was that he was railing against this kind of censorship from the right, almost the religious right, and here we are in 2020 and we're still raging against some censorship and stuff, and you think, does much change, or is it all just circular, you know?
Sì, sì. Pulisciti le mani, che fai? L'odore è buono, mi piace. Yeah, no, I am curious about that too, and like, you know, especially in the comedy world, that's taken extra flack from what, you know, what would be considered the left, I guess. Now it's so convoluted, you know, as someone that's come out of you know, was raised by the radical left, basically. I it's a really confusing time because I feel like things are so splintered even within what you would consider the left. The left doesn't really exist anymore.
No.
As I would have seen it. We don't have and I say we because almost as a religion, I was raised in religion that I abandoned fairly quickly. And then I was also raised in the religion of you know, Marxism and these kind of ideals, which I've learned. I take a lot from them. I'm a big reader, and I studied that a lot growing up, and I came up in circles of international socialism, Trotskyite, all this stuff, and I've definitely I'm not in that anymore. I've found that it's been so splintered. It's difficult for me to just align myself with one perspective. I try to learn from many perspectives. With that being said, yes, the quote unquote left, which is really hard for me to call the left sometimes, more liberals than anybody. They are actually the biggest proponents of censorship now in many ways, and so it would be curious to see what a Bill Hicks would think of that in this environment right now. And at the same time, I'm one of these people that believes that there needed to be some correction, and I also am one of these people that believes that there's way too much overcorrection to the point where it's like illogical at times, and people are getting, you know, called racists or Nazis when they're far from that, or fascists. Like the term fascism gets tossed around a lot. In fact, the right wing loves to use the term fascist for the left as an insult for the left, and the left loves to use the term as an insult for the right. And it's neither of them have really read the definition very carefully. It's like fascism is an actual thing that exists. It's hyper nationalism connected to the state. Let's focus on that.
Exactly.
Like I call Trump a neo-fascist. I'd call Putin a neo-fascist. You know, like these are pretty, like, there's a definition. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something you toss around like an insult. Oh, he's a Nazi. I think that's just overused. I feel like people are just illogical with their use of language. They toss it around because language is powerful. You could scream fire in a room and a lot of faces will turn. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing right now. They're figuring it out. I think as far as young people that are overcorrecting and kind of like making tons of rules, you could call them censorship rules. You could call them rules for their spaces. I think in the end, it's still going to be better than allowing things like racism and homophobia and transphobia and sexism to exist like it just existed unchecked for so many years. In our spaces of punk rock, especially punk rock, we always checked it. You know what I mean? Like that was like is not really a thing we let slide. I mean, I used to go to 924 Gilman Street when I was tween, and those rules were always there. Like, you know, not that everyone always followed them, but the rules were there for the space. Like in this space, we don't allow people saying homophobic slurs. We don't allow people being racist, overtly racist. We don't allow skinheads that are, you know, like that was something I grew up in. Now that's kind of becoming standardized, and language is being shifted, and jargon is being shifted, and kind of these convoluted ideas of, I think, are oversimplified ideas of race theory are becoming kind of popularized. And I think on some level, it's funny because I was such an early, I lived in such an early version of that was so nuanced and so outside of the popular language, that now watching other people kind of coming to this language and figure it out for the first time is interesting to me. I think a lot of times it's done incorrectly, it's spoken incorrectly, and they're kind of just like repeating one another in the way that happens culturally. Anyhow, because of that, I'm sure Bill Hicks would have, someone like Bill Hicks would have, would love to push buttons and question that as well. I mean, I put myself in the space like Karl Marx, a person who is constantly questioning, constantly criticizing. Like Karl Marx spoke of the ruthless criticism of everything in existence. You know what I mean? Right, of even himself. You know what I mean? So, of even these political theories we have believed in at some point, there's no progress without criticism, critique, and staying malleable, flexible, because the world changes. Things happen, wars happen, pandemics happen, prison happens. You know what I mean? Like when my language, I can't be speaking when I was in prison, I couldn't be speaking the language of academia. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like that ain't the way. We code switch, and we have to understand our situations by where we're at. So I know I just said a lot there, but yeah.
No. I tend to agree with that, because I think me and you are sort of we're kind of the same sort of rough, you know, same sort of rough kind of timelines. And one of the things I've always felt, particularly, and I don't know how this reflects your experience in America, but particularly in this part of the world, that I've always said it, that people are kind of like, they become like lazy cows. They've had it too good for too long, and they live in this kind of, that's why it becomes like LARPing. They live in this little world, and they don't. I've often said to people, like, dude, however hard you think your life is here, try being someone who lives in, Bolivia, or someone, and some of the situations that people live in, or, people. A perfect example of this, I mean, I have very good friends in Argentina, and when I was 16, 20 and all that, and sitting there reading this, they were having to go and fight in wars, and having gunters, and, being shot for having long hair. And there's so much non-reality. I think a lot of people in our parts of the world, particularly here, don't understand so much. I don't know if that reflects over in America so much, but
I absolutely. I mean, one of my biggest criticisms right now is, in war times, is that people are just noticing war times have always been happening. You know what I mean? Like, one of my biggest criticisms is that because of the media stronghold on the population, the media could be like, oh, this is a war that benefits us in some way. Because if we are able to take this could lead to money, or this could lead to power in a certain area. So let's make this a big deal for our population to get behind. We'll make all these people who were calling themselves pacifists 2 months ago send money for AKs and tanks 2 months later, and it's like your pacifism is a privilege. Peace is a privilege. When things like Black Lives Matter protests, when I was defending violent action, people would be like, "Oh my God, you're a savage for defending violent action." I was like, violence happens every day. War happens constantly. You're just noticing it now because powers that are above you have decided that this is something you should notice now. It happens constantly. There's other less popular wars out there happening right now. I mean, people barely knew what happened in Syria. As I was watching an actual revolution happen, one of the most intriguing revolutions I've ever seen, which I got a bit obsessed with, was, northwestern Kurdistan. And some Americans, especially, and I would say like in the anarchist space, even lost their lives to defend people that were trying to create a new government based around the theories and ideals, political theory of Murray Bookchin, who was an American political theorist. So super amazing history that was going on. Also, most people didn't notice anything was happening until the U.S. jumped in to support with weapons, which was pseudo necessary because these are people who were being attacked by ISIS, Turkey, Iraq. I mean, they were like surrounded by these enemy borders. They didn't really notice anything was happening in the United States until like years later. Like most people I would speak to had no idea these constant wars were happening. And then Trump was like, "Nah, we're actually going to pull out of here." So it just became this really, convoluted mess. One thing I've learned is that there's nothing. War is messy. Afghanistan. You're not talking about like Afghanistan's a good example of. That's not one enemy. You know what I mean? It's not like one good guy and one bad guy. The reason that's hundreds of families and tribes and small guerrilla factions, and it's super complicated. It's not some thing you could just make black and white. Like Americans love to do this because it's so convenient. And also we've been fed so much mythology our entire lives, from religion to politics to the Democrats to Republicans. And so now having a villainous character like Putin is a real easy war to, it's really easy to be like, okay, we're going to be against this villain. It's very easy. And yeah, I'll say he's a neo-fascist villain. But why did you notice that war? Just think about, why did you notice that war above all the other wars happening in this world? Why are you sending money for tanks now? Yeah. I don't know. No. I think a lot of it is what you're talking about. It's complacency. It's just waiting for the call to be the cheerleader for one side or something. And shit is never that simple. It is never that simple. I think the internet's made it. Echo. The internet and meme culture has made that even more prevalent. It's made people be like, aspetta, sto parlando. The internet and meme culture has made that even more prevalent. It's like being like, oh God, I could simplify an entire theory by putting this one picture with one sentence. No. There's entire books written about that thing that you try to summarize in a sentence, in a picture.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Entire careers spent studying the thing you tried to summarize in a sentence. Yet now we have experts that just post a picture and pick a side, or pick an ideology, or pick a identity that is really convenient for them to get behind, or if it's not convenient, it's actually cool, or it feels like welcoming to be a part of this type of identity, or associated with a certain ideology, without actually experiencing much or even knowing much about what they're talking about. I've seen that a lot.
It's because it's easy, my friend. It's easy to put, like you say, it's easy to put like something up, a meme or a flag on your you know, your avatar and stuff like that. It's hard to do the hard work. I mean, I've seen in the last 3 weeks, and everyone's like, boycott Coca-Cola, boycott that. I'm like, well, why are you saying it now? I mean, iPhones being made in China where people are committing, you've got suicide nets. So why is it something now? Because it's easy just to put something up, but they won't. The real change is going to be individuals making that small things, you know, building local communities, building local families and stuff like that. But that's hard work. I mean, people just want to go, I'll put that up and then go down to the local Burger King and get a, you know, a nice double steak or something, or whatever it may be. Do you know, people don't want to put the hard work in.
Democracy is hard work. Real democracy, oh, that is sometimes impossibly hard work. Trying to get people to actually vote on every piece of legislation. Like, I mean, we're not saying real democracy is what was happening in Syria. When you're direct democracy, that's so difficult. Like, people don't understand. They don't want to actually put in that work. And I agree. Like, I think eventually we might be forced to have our smaller communities and have our rules for our smaller communities, that, you know, and have our standards for our smaller communities. And that's maybe where our ideals, or at least something comparable to our ideals, that's maybe where we could live that way to some degree within the belly of a beast. You know, we start a community in the forest somewhere, and we decide within this community, this is how we want to live. You know, that's where like small revolutions can happen. It's not going to happen by, like, you know, boycott this thing that we actually support every day without knowing, you know.
Yeah.
Boycott oil, but I got to drive to work because that's the way that my boss is forced. You know, it's like, no, that's reactionary thinking, and it's not practical, and it's actually counter-revolutionary in the end, because you're not actually leading to anything effective. You're not building community. You're not supporting the people around you. You're just saying, that's bad, that's bad. That's fine to say that's bad, and you don't believe in it. Now, what are you doing to lift up your community?
Yeah.
You know?
No,
I just see that a lot.
On that one, I mean, again, I'm always interested to ask someone. I mean, how did you, and obviously being a native Puerto Rican living in America, how did you find this, what we've just been talking about, kind of, how do you find the English experience? I mean, obviously you're over in tour. I mean, how did you I mean, is it, I mean, again, just give me your reflections of how you find us compared to you in America, because it's always said that America sneezes and 6 months later England catches a cold. You know, like, we're always behind. I mean, I mean,
I mean, I find I was pretty inspired, you know. Bello, sto parlando, per piacere. I was pretty inspired by what I saw out there. I mean, obviously being surrounded by the right people helps, right? I think in every place, no matter where you go in the world, pretty much anywhere in the world, you're going to find people that inspire you, small communities that inspire you, you know. I mean, I had never really traveled England that much, and it was my first time seeing, you know, it's my first time in a place like Brighton, where they're still, like, you know, they're going hard with the anarchist bookstore and the and, you know, and these things that we see kind of as and I mean, in a fully gentrified neighborhood, we see that as almost an impossibility in America, you know. Like, these are things that of a past. I see it, of course, in Europe in general. I've seen a whole I've seen giant communities of that, and I've seen it I've seen that culture be stronger there, a culture of questioning and supporting kind of alternative thinking, if you want to come up with a name for it. I see it a lot less in America. If you're talking about if you're talking about staying complacent, I think Americans are some of the most complacent people in the world because we are fairly comfortable. I mean, there's or if we're uncomfortable, it's because of poverty, lack of medical care, violence that that we're surrounded by daily. So then we're all fucking working all the time. So it's this combination of just like, I don't have time to care. By the time I'm resting, I'm trying to survive, I'm trying to dodge a bullet, and I'm trying to like rest before my next shift because it's the only way I'm gonna live. And I'm trying, and then when I, eventually have to go to the hospital, I get charged for it too. It's like there's just a lot of, because of a higher standard of living, I think it allows in Europe in general, and I'm including England, even though whatever. I'm including England with that. It allows for spaces that you wouldn't normally see in America. So yeah, I saw I'm gonna go back to this kind of vague term, alternative communities. I saw them as existing in a stronger way than than they would in the United States, or even in a place like Puerto Rico. Like it's been colonized, and not just colonized by the Spanish first and then the United States, but colonized by capitalism in a way that's extreme, colonized by corporate America to the point where it's like, to fit in, every store has, every like Puerto Rico has the biggest mall in the Caribbean, for instance, right? So, and that's like a thing of pride, fitting in to some narrative of Americanism and brand names. Like, that's a thing of pride. That's the thing. I didn't see as much of that in England, even though I'm familiar. Like I'm familiar with English culture to a degree. I just didn't see as much of that. I didn't see, out in America, every city you go to, if it's not in the city proper, it's in the city next door to it. It'll have the exact same malls with the exact same stores. And that's in every place in America. If it's not just Walmart, it's like, here's these 20 chains, and that's what you're going to get everywhere. It's very much like organized in this way. And then we believe we're the most free. We have this mythology of freedom, and it's absolute dribble. It's absolute farce. And I mean, in England, I can see England coming closer and closer to us. I can see France coming closer and closer to us because of the power of globalization and capitalism. But yeah, in England, I was inspired by the small communities that were hanging tough and coming out to our shows and inviting us, and the respect of art as well. I think it's maybe, I hate to say it's a bit less than mainland Europe. In mainland Europe, I think there is like intense appreciation of art that's way beyond the United States, and I would say beyond England as well. But another part of the experience in England, being with Ceiling Demons and in a small town of Richmond, was the community that was like, it was there. Like, everybody knew each other. Everybody was at the pub and singing along, and it was just like this. There was more of this idea of community than I'll ever feel in any city I live in here, unfortunately. And we could have small versions of that in America, but it's been mostly erased, and I think solidly so. That's action of power, like community, strong community is a threat to power. And so I saw some of this some of the traditions and some of the smaller communities alive and well in England in a way that was really inspiring. And yeah, it made me want to go back. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for being a big part of that and for introducing me as well to parts of that.
I mean, don't get me wrong, my friend. I mean, I've seen, even in the last sort of 20, 30 years, I mean, I call it Capcom, like literally the mixing of communism and capitalism to this nice little entity that they can package and sell out. But I've seen my country change. You know, I mean, you can, like you said, you can go to, you know, literally, I mean, I flew out to Denmark just a few years ago, and it was like, I could have been in Leeds, I could have been in Manchester, I could have been anywhere. It's all the same crap. And the one thing about England is I think, particularly compared to America, I always sort of think America's like the teenage younger brother, and we've got a bit of an older history to us. So you get places like Richmond that have got buildings in it that are far older than your whole of your country.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of it. Yeah,
but it's getting eroded. Don't get me wrong, and I think there's still that element there, and yeah, I can concur with that, and particularly when you say with art as well. I mean, it always frustrates me that, particularly, you know, this part of the world in Europe, that we've been sort of like known for art for a long time, but it's been the way that art is treated in this country. It's one of the reasons why I went to Argentina, because I just got so disillusioned with the scene here, because it was just like, it was all like, how much money could you make? Not what were you giving from your heart? And it was, and I went to Argentina, which goes back to what I was saying earlier on, because they had lived through a junta and they lived through having art taken away from them. They appreciate it far more. And it's that whole thing of what I think which you're alluding to, is that when you're given too much, and it's that, which is particularly America, you make it too easy for too long, you become complacent. Like you said, you become complacent with it. You don't realize that it can all be taken away and what it really means.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's like, yeah, and that's a good point you brought up about the history. We don't have much of a connection to our history in America. In fact, a lot of it is slowly being erased. And it's funny because a lot of people think they understand it. I mean, I studied American history pretty in depth, and I studied a lot of the things that were hidden from us in high school and whatever. And yeah, I think in general, the American has the American has amnesia. You know, I mean, like, we don't want to remember our history. I mean, there'll be people. One of the interesting things, I live in a city here that's like largely, there's a large Italian American population here, right? I mean, a lot of people here are like second, third, sometimes fourth generation Italian. And they're the ones talking that don't, and I'm not talking about a lot of them, but I've seen Italians in this country forget their history so clearly. They forgot that when they came here, they were not considered white. First of all, the idea of whiteness did not even exist. I have, you know, my grandmother came from Italy. She came in with a identity card. It didn't say race on it. That idea is an American idea to begin with. It said skin tone dark. It just said skin tone dark, and you know, she never, you know, and she came here and was in a community of all people who spoke Italian and kept speaking Italian. She never really learned English that great, and over time, the second, third generations, they've completely forgotten that in the 1890s, Italians were lynched publicly by the KKK in New Orleans, for instance. You know what I mean? Like, because of comfort, they've forgotten it. And so now you'll see some of them hooting and hollering about how immigrants are the biggest problem in the United States. I'm like, that is fucking absurd to me. You know what I mean? Like, that is fucking absurd. Like, and or even worse, being proud of being white when they weren't even white when they came here. You know, which I think is just fucking absurd, you know, and that's how easily we forget history in this country. Out there, I think there is a different view of class. The class system is very clearly different. There are these sort of traits and cultural traits that are like, okay, you must be of this class by the language you're speaking, by the accents you have. Okay, uh, this means, you know, like if you're working class in England, it means a very different thing from working class in the United States. You know what I mean? Um, Bourgeois middle class means a very different thing um, in England. That's super interesting to me as well. All that is from having a more in-depth history. Um, we're still figuring out what our history is, which version of history we want to even present. I think in America, which version of culture do we want to present? Donald Trump, for instance, his version of culture that he wanted to present was some 1950s post World War II Anglo American, you know, like for lack of a better term, white American WASP culture that he saw as the purest America. My version of America is the amalgamation. You know what I mean? Like, I think America's amazing because it is so diverse. I think that's one of the biggest strengths we have, is that we are the most culturally diverse place in the entire world. I was staying in a neighborhood in New York called Astoria, Queens, that it was the most culturally diverse neighborhood in the entire world. I mean, that is so special. That is something some of us are now embracing. I don't think that's been the popular version of what makes America great, quote unquote, you know, but that's what makes it great to me. Immigration being a space of diversity that, you know, but yeah, with that being said, our history is vague. Our history has been manipulated. Our history has been edited multiple times. Your history is more direct and longer, and you can see tradition staying in place in a different way, you know.
So. Yeah, dude, I mean, I think one of the things you probably, I don't know if you can you picked up on it when you're over here, is that you can travel from, let's take an example, from Brighton, which is down by the south coast, and by the time you get to, you travel north and north and north, by the time you get to Scotland, the whole accents have changed completely.
Oh yeah,
it's still that thing. And I mean, I think it's kind of a bit hilarious that you're talking about the English a lot, because as you know, when you cross that border into Scotland, it's a whole different ballgame, because we're
yeah, that was so cool too. That was so amazing. And another amazing thing I noticed in England was like the history of the colonies, and how the colonies have created a modern British culture as well. You know what I mean? Like Indian food as we know it, the Indian restaurant as we know it, even in America, was really created in England. Like the idea of that was really a curry has become traditional food to British people. That was really interesting. The way colonial history has also influenced the general zeitgeist. You know what I mean? In England, that was, and then what you're saying about accents, because what I noticed, what I gathered, this is just my perspective and a little bit of knowledge. The more you go north, the accent changes more, and you're also seeing more working class people. You're seeing old factory towns, post-industrial spaces, and it's this real direct connection. Yeah, that's kind of like, aside from like the wonderful experiences with people, individuals, that's kind of like my overview of the country. Those are some things I took away from it.
Perfect. Well, I mean, it's amazing we've talked for all this time. We haven't really spoken about the tour and reflections. I mean, I loved it because of one of my And I don't know, I know you would never talk about it, but I feel I can. I thought one of the nicest things I've ever seen, was when you bought the twins the guitar. I mean, that old black guitar, dude. I don't know.
Oh man,
I remember watching you the first two gigs again. You're really struggling with that thing because it's going out of tune so badly.
dude, that thing was yeah. So we should explain. Maybe you should explain like so when we first started the tour, I always borrow guitars from my friends usually, or oftentimes I'll like buy a guitar. There's a chain in America called Guitar Center, and you could kind of buy a guitar there and then return it like 40 days later if you have to. I've done that like way too many times. I've also kept some of them, so it's kind of worked out in their favor as well. I'll fall in love with the guitar sometimes, but yeah, like when I first got to England, the black guitar that Ceiling Demons lent me, it was painful to play, and I've played some pretty terrible guitars in my life. I never really play fancy guitars anymore, and that was like a physically painful guitar to play. Like the action was so high, I had to press super hard. My fingers were pretty much bleeding. I think they were actually bleeding after playing that guitar for a couple of nights. And so at some point I decided it was not just as soon as we got like a day off, I decided I wanted to buy a guitar and gift it to them, because anytime I return to England, I'm also going to use that as well. It was partially I had my as far aside from being a gift that I really really wanted them to have, I really wanted them to be able to play a better guitar. It was also, I had my motivation. I didn't want to kill my fingers anymore either.
No, it was, like I said, it was. I mean, I don't want to sort of like talk too much inside, but it was I had never done a tour before, so it was fascinating for me just to sort of step in as an outsider, not being a musician. And what I found, one of my overriding memories of the tour particularly, and it kind of reflects to you a lot really, was the amount of times I loved the way that you moved around, because I've never seen you live before. So I love the way you moved from stage, and the stage was basically wherever we were, even if it's walking outside and stuff like that. And again, and I have to sort of say this to you, dude, as man to man, the amount of people I saw cry when you were singing them your lyrics, it was like I've been to so many gigs, I've been to all sorts of genres of music, and I don't think I've ever seen people so viscerally affected by lyrics as you were. I mean, particularly someone like you mentioned Brighton Long. I mean, I remember people literally, two girls crying at through your set, and that must mean a lot to you, because it's hard when you're writing lyrics to sort of thing. You do it all in, like we do as creative people, we do it all in private, and then you have to see what it has affected on people. It must kind of really uplift your soul in some way.
Yeah, it's uplifting, and it's part of the reason I do it is to make that connection with humans, but also it's a big responsibility. It's like that one of those girls that was crying at that show had just survived an overdose, was just out the hospital and was begging me to play this song. I don't think she ever thought she'd see that in her life. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of the people, even though the shows, we were deep in pandemic, right? At this point, we should explain, we had to reschedule like 3 times, I think. And, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people in England didn't expect to ever experience those songs in person. And even though they weren't big shows or anything, the people who were there were just deeply cared, so
Yeah, they did. Yeah, I think that's the thing about when you do see that underground, for want of a better word, of people. They appreciate it, and I think particularly when they, again, the pandemic kind of like took a lot away from people, and I think people really sort of
Mm-hmm.
appreciated it. And I've noticed it. I noticed it from people kind of like they wanted the live experience, and because they become complacent. It's like a theme of this conversation. They become complacent with all, and it got taken away by the state, and then suddenly like, oh, actually, this is what being human's about, and you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
from my perspective, dude, it was two of my highlights of my life were painting with you. So that's just from my perspective. You know what I mean? I like, you know, they were. It was a highlight of my life so far. You know, just to get up on stage and paint with someone other than the Seaman Demons.
That was really cool. Yeah, it was really cool to see what you came up with every night also. And thank you for the painting as well, for shipping it out. I really appreciate that. And
No,
yeah, no, it was just that was a unique experience. I love the Ceiling Demons, like all of you guys, and just I got, you know, I feel like we all got much closer. But I just really appreciate what they are keeping alive. Um, I think they're representing. I think the brothers specifically are representing kind of the tiniest niche scene of left field hip hop in America. And they're keeping this kind of like, and they value it so much, and they, you know, it's like, it's what I came out of. It's like what, you know, it's my scene really. Like they love Anticon, and you know they're familiar with like Project Blowed, and these are the things we could get nerdy about it. But I am like that. I was even younger. I was young. I was a teenager when, in my late teens, when I first met, for instance, like the people who started Anticon, and meeting some younger brothers than me in England who basically worship, you know, what artistically worship what my friends did. It fills my heart. It gives me some hope that what we've created will continue with generationally. And then some of the younger audience members that I got to meet in England did also, you know. There were kids that came up to me that have been listening to me since they were 14 years old, and now they were old enough to drink and come out to shows, and we're so grateful. And they didn't think they'd ever see me in their lives, and that was, yeah, it was really, really special. I don't even know where the question started or whatever. Oh yeah, I think another thing I wanted to say is like with the pandemic, I think it was beyond complacency. I think there are mechanisms of survival, you know, like we sometimes tell ourselves, sometimes we sometimes our complacency is, or what we see as complacency, maybe you and I, because we're pretty adventurous people, I'd say, compared to most. uh, I'd say I don't even want to call it complacency in some cases. In the case of the pandemic, I think they were survival tactics. Um, and once they were confronted with the energy of with this like raw human energy through music, it's almost shocking when you've been sleeping for 2 years. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like actually, like literally sleeping, like probably like sleeping a lot, watching a lot of TV. You know, I'm not trying to make a metaphor. Like it's like literal. So yeah, I think that's what we were saying.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, before we sort of do wrap this up, and what are your plans for this year?
So I started a new band. I've been told not to talk about it much because it is kind of secretive, but that's the thing I've been doing in Los Angeles. Had to come home to take care of some things. Like, as you could tell, I'm like taking care of puppies and babies here, but yeah, my family needed me back, so I couldn't quite finish the record. I have the last record of a trilogy called "Bring Us the Head of Francisco Faults" that and I'm hoping to at least put some work into. I don't know if I'll finish it because of just life circumstances, but yeah, that's a hope as well. Those are my main goals this year. It's just I'm really close with the band record, and then to focus on that final solo record. And aside from that, I'm not touring super heavily. I don't have any major tour planned. Just focusing on recording a lot and just family, and then maybe eventually I'll focus on my health. That might be cool.
Well, this is one of the things can, from one creative person to another, you have to look after yourself. And I think this is the thing, people like me and you, we tend to put everyone else first. And it's like I always say to people, put yourself through, because honestly, from my perspective like this, you know, that's why I say to someone like, you know, I would say to you is like, dude, if you don't put yourself first, then we don't get to have the enjoyment afterwards. You know, you need to put your, you know, it's a good lesson for life, really. People need to concentrate on themselves first, try to get this thing up here sorted out first in their own body before they try to go out and cure the world with avatar stickers and, you know, boycotts, you know.
Yeah, I think you were getting to that earlier, and like I think you're absolutely right. And that took a long time for me to realize too. So that definitely came up, you know, boycotting whatever, you know. I came up in that kind of like reactionary activist world as well, and I was raised by that, and I have taken a lot from that, and I appreciate those experiences. But I think you're right, and for a long time I looked at like therapy or like as something selfish almost, and I'm slowly shifting that perspective. So
that's perfect. Look, I want to, before we sort of do wrap this up, I want to thank you very much for your time, dude, because I know we've been trying to get this on and off sort of like maybe 6 or 7 months, so we finally got here. But I know how precious your time is and how busy your time is, so thank you very much for your time, dude. I would love, I mean, I was saying this to the twins the other day, I mean, one of my dreams is hopefully at some point, maybe this year, next year, we get across and you can show us America. We've given you the, you know, we give you the
oh yeah,
yeah,
let's see. Yeah, I hope that could happen. Yeah,
it'd be great. But before we do wrap this up, and I want to say thank you for your time and stuff like that. I want to leave you with the final word. So, you know, enlighten us, brother.
Oh, I just appreciate you, and I appreciate your dedication to art and how adventurous you are just as a person, and how kind you have been to me during our travels, and how welcoming you've been. So, thanks for inviting me on here.
Well, thank you for your time, and with that I say life is people.
Much love, man.
Well, they say that life is people, and that people are angels, and that angels are devils, and the devils are me and you.